This is College Matters from the Chronicle.
I think I work with the finest faculty in America. I think a third of them should be put on an ice floe. I think they absolutely don't pull their weight. And not only do they not pull their weight, they have become so irrelevant in their domain that they find the only relevance they can achieve is by being very obstructive on the faculty.
Scott Galloway is one of higher education's most acerbic critics. He's a New York University marketing professor and a man of some nuanced contradictions. He's deeply skeptical of highly selective universities, but desperately committed to his son attending one. He is living proof of higher education's capacity to increase social mobility, but he's pessimistic about how much colleges can really change the lives of students. Galloway is co-host of the Pivot podcast with Kara Swisher, and he's the entrepreneur behind Prof G Media Company. Today on the show, I'll talk with him about the universities that are getting it wrong, the ones that are getting it right, and what the HBO series The White Lotus might reveal about prestige and privilege in higher ed. Thanks for doing this, Scott. Welcome to College Matters.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
I was talking to some colleagues before this, and someone asked me, what do you want to talk to Scott Galloway about? What are his politics? Is this guy lean right? And I said, I don't know. I think you have a reputation for sharing some skepticism about liberal excesses in the academy. Do you think that's fair? And is that something that happened over time in your career in higher ed?
Thoughtful question. I consider myself right of center left, and I like to think that critical thinking is to go issue by issue, and as opposed to just signing up for one orthodoxy or the other. But it's an express ticket to pissing everybody off. You know, the right writes me off as a libtard, and the left treats me like an apostate, where 2/3 of issues I agree with progressives, and then if you come out and say Biden should resign, he's too old, or the education, higher ed is in many instances morally corrupt, it's sort of like, well, we thought we could trust you, and they treat you. The algorithms hate people in the middle, and I would consider myself someone who's, fairly moderate, but.
I mean, we're talking in huge generalities, but you mentioned moral corruption. Is that something you assign broadly to higher ed?
I think that people make the mistake of believing that because we're academics that we are much more noble than we are. And I think that largely speaking, especially among the elite universities, there's been a concerted effort to sequester supply such that we can raise tuition faster than inflation and answer the question most administrators and faculty wake up and ask themselves every morning, and that is, how do I increase my compensation while reducing my accountability? And you end up with universities like MIT where there are 16 people working there for every one who teaches, or student loan departments that leverage cheap debt to encumber kids with debt that they're never going to be able to pay back, to what is, in my opinion, support many institutions that are inefficient and increasingly irrelevant, and taking advantage of the fact that the elite schools reject more kids than they need to maintain some sort of brand equity, which the alumni love, because if there's fewer and fewer degrees, your degree goes up. And as a result, we end up with millions of kids who are arbitraged down to a mediocre school, where because of price fixing and a cartel-like nature that would not be allowed in any other industry, a lot of kids end up paying a Mercedes price for a Hyundai product. And then a lot of them decide college isn't for them, and freshmen and sophomore drop out after 2 years with $50,000, $80,000, $100,000 in debt, which, by the way, unlike almost every other form of debt, is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. So, I mean, this is a massive generalization. I think Purdue, ASU, the University of California are doing God's work and trying really hard to expand access. But I think a lot of the leading universities have slowly but surely. No one who runs big tech thinks of themselves as anyone who's encouraging girls to self-harm. But these incremental decisions around shareholder value over safety concerns have resulted in a situation where these individuals slowly but surely have created an ecosystem that is really damaging to our youth in exchange for shareholder value. To a lesser extent, it's not as mendacious as that, but I think the leadership of many of our most elite universities have decided that their luxury brands are no longer public servants, and that middle-class households have affected a several $100 billion transfer of wealth to elite universities. So if you're sitting on a $50 billion endowment and only letting in 1,500 kids a year, you're no longer a public servant. I think you should lose your tax-free status. You're a hedge fund offering classes. So I'm comfortable assigning that term to a lot of university leadership.
I mean, at risk of being reductive and getting into some labels here, the
Sure.
rap on the academy is that it leans left or that it's dominated by people who are progressives. And you're talking about some things as a matter of policy that they're doing that probably wouldn't align with certain progressive values. I've been thinking the same thing as I see a number of academics show up in this trove of Epstein files. We have a number of academics who are showing up in here. Epstein clearly was drawn to the academy, and I think to some degree people in the academy were drawn to him. What do you make of that?
I haven't really thought about the direct links with the universities. I get invited to a lot of events with a lot of these guys, and I say I'm their intellectual support dog, that these gatherings of the masters of the universe like to throw in a couple academics. It makes it the whole thing feel a little bit more, I don't know, interesting or noble, so to speak.
When you say gatherings of these guys, I'm sorry, who do you mean?
Davos, brilliant minds, crazy high-end gatherings where they invite some academics. I run into Jonathan Haidt and Adam Grant all over the world. So kind of these big conferences where they'll invite, the CEOs of Anthropic and Microsoft and name whatever academic at that point has something kind of interesting to say.
So rich playboys sometimes like to have a few eggheads around?
So it's so funny, my podcast co-host Kara Swisher said she immediately searched my name in the Epstein files and she didn't find it.
I'm sure to her great disappointment.
Yeah, there's a lot. Like I guess Epstein was involved with MIT, and there's this general because we're nonprofits, and I do think there's a lot of good people in higher education, but be clear, if you give them the ability to raise prices faster than inflation and it hurts middle-class households such that they have to work less and make more money, they're going to do that. And when you have a regulatory framework where the accreditation body, which decides whether or not that institution can issue debt so kids can afford to go to school there, restricts the number of new entrants, and it's controlled by the incumbents, you end up with a situation. Essentially, higher ed is the following. It's a duopoly in every big city. In every big city, there's two prestigious schools that command a huge price. It's a very strong ecosystem. Columbia and NYU reject 90% of their applicants, and the kids who didn't get in go to Fordham, and Fordham recognizes they have pricing power because so many kids who didn't get into NYU or Columbia, they still can charge the same rate.
But I mean, Scott, aren't you to some degree buying into the idea that exclusivity means that you went to the right school? I mean, you were saying you had an analogy before about cars, paying Ferrari prices for a Hyundai or something to this effect. You kind of feel like the Ferraris are the most selective institutions, don't you?
So let's go to what a university does, the value add. We don't educate our students. We certify them. The value add of a university is over once we've admitted a student. Because essentially what we are is we're a much more intricate, well-resourced HR department. So let's talk about the business model here. People say, well, the student is our customer. No, they're not. Corporations are our customer. Students are the product. And the value out of a university is it goes through this massive screening process where they have to spend years getting internships, studying for tests, playing well with others, becoming captain of the lacrosse team. And we have the most intense, robust, rigorous application process in the world. And then if you get through that process, a corporation is willing to show up and say, okay, any graduate of UVA or Carnegie Mellon or Caltech, we will pay a 40 to 50% premium for someone who has not gone through that gauntlet or that screening. So the idea that there's some exclusivity and some rigor and that a lot of kids are rejected, I get it. It makes sense. We live in a capitalist society that believes in winners and losers. Now, having said that, when I went to UCLA, when I got into UCLA, it had an admissions rate of 74%. By the way, I was one of the 26% that didn't get in. I had to appeal, and then I got in. This year, the admissions rate will be 9%. Now, some of that is because of Common App. They're getting double or triple the amount of apps. But say it's gone from 74% to 30%. Back when I applied in the 80s, it wasn't a Joey Bag of Donuts brand. It was still a good brand. So I get the notion that Harvard should not have a 100% admissions rate. But should it have a 4% admissions rate? If you were really concerned with the future of our society and being a public servant, wouldn't you take some of that money and expand the size of your freshman class? This is what higher ed is right now. And all this around, oh, people don't need college anymore. Anyone who tells you that, oh, your kid doesn't need college anymore because of AI, that means they just found out their kid got a 22 on the ACT and they're trying to make themselves feel better. College has never been more important. And this is what college is, higher ed. If it was a pharmaceutical and you took this, it makes you twice as likely to get married. It makes you half as likely to kill yourself. It makes you half as likely to be obese, have diabetes. It means you're probably going to make twice as much over the course of your lifetime. You're something like 40 times more likely to run for political office someday. You're more likely to have children. You're dramatically less likely to ever commit a crime. If you had that drug, would you hoard it such that you could charge more for it?
But
well, maybe.
I'm trying to square these two things, Scott,
Sure.
because you're saying that college does all of these miraculous things, and if it were a drug, we would bottle it and have it in every store. But at the same time, you don't have any fundamental belief that colleges actually educate the people who go through their doors.
But it doesn't matter what the value is. If you attract a group of people...
You're saying the credential alone is responsible for all those good outcomes.
Well, it motivates a lot of high school kids to achieve. It attracts an unbelievable gene pool. It's not only education. Where did you go to college, Jack?
Florida State and Auburn, so I'm a state school guy.
Yeah, I went publics all the way through too. I think the chance to kind of season, mature, for me, the biggest value out of UCLA was I didn't spend a lot of time with other people. I was a bit of an introvert. I didn't have any male role models in my life. I went to UCLA. I made a bunch of friends. I learned how to fall in love. I learned how to get my heart broken. I learned my limits in terms of alcohol consumption. I learned how to get along with others. You know, it was just a seasoning I needed for maturity, I would say. So there's just enormous benefits. And college isn't right for anyone. 2/3 of kids in the U.S. aren't going to get a traditional liberal arts degree. But for good kids, unfortunately, I think what we figured out a way to do is to take way too much economic vitality out of that household. I went through, let's play this game. You're younger than me. I went through 5 years of UCLA because I graduated with a 2.27 GPA. It took me 5 years to get an undergraduate degree. And then with a 2.27 GPA, Berkeley let me into business school. And so not only was the access there, but all 7 years, my total tuition was $7,000. Now, I recognize they can't maintain those tuition levels, but it has gotten so expensive and so difficult to access. And what happens when my dean announces they've rejected 90% of the applicants, the faculty do what, Jack? They stand up and applaud. And I think that's tantamount to the head of a homeless shelter bragging that he or she turned away 9 in 10 people last night. I'm not suggesting the acceptance rate should be 90%. I'm suggesting the acceptance rate should maybe be 15, 20%, and that if we held ourselves to higher standards of productivity, we'd be able to dramatically lower the cost.
And again, we're speaking in generalities here, Scott, but do you think faculty actively want a low admissions rate? We talk about institutions
I think they
doing
love
this.
it,
We
Jack.
talk about NYU, where you teach,
I think
having
they love
an
it.
8% admissions rate. Is that something the faculty want?
Well, it might be proximity bias, but I think faculty at quote-unquote elite universities absolutely love the admissions rate going down. Look at the places that have had the greatest increase in pricing. It's healthcare, it's housing, and it's education. And what happens when you get a house? You immediately show up to the local review board meeting and get very concerned with traffic and don't want any new housing permits issued because it takes the value of your house up. And the faculty and alumni of universities absolutely love and endorse lower admissions rates. And one of the worst things that happened, in my opinion, to higher education or to the U.S. populace was the Business Week school ranking, because one of the inputs was how low your admissions rate was. So it was a self-perpetuating cycle. If you lower your admissions rate, you go up in the rankings. You go up in the rankings, you get more applications, and your admissions rate goes down. And again, I don't expect Harvard to have a 94% admissions rate. I guess the question is, should it have a 4% admissions rate when it has all these resources?
One of the stats that moves me the most, Scott, is about social mobility and how ineffective colleges are at changing social mobility for students. If you show up rich, you leave rich. If you show up poor, you might leave poor. I mean, I don't have all the data in front of me, but that's the gist of it. And it strikes me that, again, it's another situation in which the idea of this hyper-liberal academy rubs up against the reality that a lot of the things the academy does don't seem in keeping with the progressive talking points. I mean, you've talked about that colleges really just want to admit that, I think you called them the freakishly remarkable people, and create sort of a super class of billionaires. This seems very antithetical to me to the picture that we have out there of faculty as liberal to a fault, deeply progressive thinkers. Are they hypocrites, or do we just have this all wrong about who's in the academy?
You said something really interesting around income mobility. And income mobility of your graduates is, I think, for example, would be a fantastic metric for, say, Pell Grants or government funding, or, come up with whatever universities are striving for. If you were to evaluate like the core mission of a university, to your point, it might be the number of kids who register income mobility, right? Find good kids that maybe come from, my mother lived and died as a secretary. Our household income was never over $40,000, right? This year, I'm going to pay $7 million in taxes. That's income mobility because of the generosity of California taxpayers in the vision of the Regents to the University of California. In my opinion, that is why we have universities. In addition, you could layer on, great research, producing leaders, whatever additional criteria you put on. But income mobility would be a good one. So what you said before, elite universities have two types of kids. The children of rich kids. You're 77 times more likely to get into an elite university if you come from a top 1% income earning household. And I'm living this. If the average high school, and you have to reverse engineer to when a kid is 5. Like, there's a lot of inputs. The average public high school spends $15,000 per kid. High schools in low-income areas, because revenue is largely linked to property taxes, spend $10,000. But let's say $15,000. The average private school spends $75,000 a year per student. So a delta of $60,000 over 12 years, that's $720,000 is used for tutoring, after-school programs, better teaching, more feedback, career counseling, psychological support, also individual attention. If you throw $750,000 at a kid through an educational infrastructure, what do you know? Middle-income kids score 120 points higher on the SAT than lower-income kids. And then the income inequality actually goes greater between middle-income and upper income, the private school kids. They score 250 points on average greater on the SAT than middle income kids. So if you wanted to true up testing based on income, you would spot a low income kid on the SAT 370 points. So we let in the children of rich people, okay? Not because we love rich people, but because their kids, quite frankly, show up so much better prepared for college. And they study to the test, and we get them to study to the test of what you need to do to get into college. And then the other cohort we let in are the freakishly remarkable. A kid that grew up in a low-income neighborhood and figured out a way to find the money to go to Africa and build wells between his junior and senior year, that started a fundraiser for senior care, that also happens to be the captain of the lacrosse team. And the downside of our optimism as Americans is that we all believe our kid's going to be in the top 1%. And I can prove to every one of us that 99% of our children are not going to be in the top 1%. And I think there's so much manufactured stress and anxiety around this rejectionist LVMH-like culture that elite universities have built where, and I fall into this, I'd like to think, okay, I've read the data. The best kids at Michigan State will probably do almost as well as the best kids at, name your top-tier university, Vanderbilt. Fine. Mm-hmm. I have fallen into the trap of believing that the first major test of my quality or character as a parent is whether my kid gets into an elite school or not.
You personally have fallen into that trap.
Oh, 100%.
Where are you on this journey right now, Scott?
Well, my kid is a senior in high school and just applied to and got into a college. And I'd like to think I was one of these people that said, I want him to be happy wherever he wants. I would have been crushed if he'd not gotten into a good university. And I'm embarrassed saying that. But in the United States, parents have decided, and every signal is that your first major evaluation of your kid and your parenting skills is where your kid goes to college. And what I'm suggesting is we need the economic incentives to go back to where we were in the 80s, where were you a good student in high school, Jack?
I think I was, a B-plus student.
Yeah, me too. I think a B-plus student who doesn't have his act together should have the
I
opportunity.
didn't say that, Scott.
You didn't say that?
No, I had my act somewhat together.
Yeah, I did not. I was a B-plus student, but you know who doesn't need college? Kids from the top 1% income-earning households. They typically already have great contacts. They typically already have a great education.
We're putting a lot of energy in making sure they go, though.
Oh, so it's become it's become finishing school. So my point is, I think the core mission of a university in terms of priority is to take good kids and turn them into great contributors. Because the kids who are already freakishly remarkable at 17 or 18, I'm not suggesting they shouldn't need to go to college. Or if your dad is a millionaire, things are going to work out for you. So how do we go back to the system of how do we find, and by the way, the state schools in Florida, I think, do a pretty good job of this, right? It used to be, I think when you applied, you said you went to FSU?
Yes, that's where I did my undergrad.
So FSU, I think it used to be, if you were in the top third of your high school class, they guaranteed you a seat. Is that still the case?
It's a lot more competitive to get into any of these Florida schools.
Every school's more competitive. Every school. UC Boulder used to be a safety school. Now it's become difficult to get into. SMU used to be kids' safety school. Now it's a prestigious school that's hard to get into. Mm-hmm. We have effectively decided that the ultimate strategy for increasing housing prices and increasing our power as faculty, as alumni, is to artificially sequester and reduce supply of freshman seats. And I believe I believe there's legislation and solutions here. I believe if you have an endowment over $1 billion and you aren't growing your freshman class size faster than the population, I think you should lose your tax-free status because you're no longer a public servant.
Well, the guy who's been out there making this case for 20 years is Michael Crow at Arizona State, right?
Who's doing God's work.
I don't see a lot of copycats out there. So I'm wondering how effective the proselytization has been.
To be fair, and and because I have made a lot of generalizations, I'm being critical of an entire ecosystem here. Purdue I don't believe, has raised its tuition in 20 years. The University of California and Governor Newsom and the regents there have said, we are going to expand freshman class size by the size of one campus by doing things like classes during summer, night classes.
Yeah, huge caveat on my end. I'm sure there are people who have adopted the same position. He's the highest profile preacher on this, Crow is.
Yeah, and he's basically said, I want to graduate a couple 100,000 students a year, not a couple thousand. That's how you change the game is by...
But, he was at Columbia before he was at Arizona State. And I wrote a profile of him many years ago. And one of the things I was very intrigued by was if he had not come from Columbia, would this guy have been taken seriously? I mean, people were paying attention to him because he had the quote-unquote elite credential to go into Arizona State. If he had graduated from Arizona State or worked at Arizona State and then had this idea about admitting the whole world, would anybody have listened?
So I agree with you that there are certain signals that give people opportunities, and the fact that not everyone has access and they are seen as a selective university, I see value in that. My thesis is that it's just gone too far. Like I said, I go back to UCLA. When it had a 74% admissions rate, it wasn't a brand. I got a job at Morgan Stanley out of a university that was admitting 3 out of 4 applicants. It was affordable and accessible, and I think its mission was, if you show promise. I mean, I remember the exact phone call, Jack. I didn't get in. I didn't have the money to live on campus, so I was going to have to live at home, which limited my options to Cal State Northridge and UCLA because I was going to have to be a commuter. I was very responsible. I missed the deadline to apply to Cal State Northridge, and I got rejected from UCLA. So all of a sudden, I found myself with no opportunity to go to college. My father got me a job installing shelving. And I would drive out to Ontario where there was a bunch of new construction, and I would literally be in a closet all day installing shelving, which I was terrible at. I am not handy at all. And I came home, I was living with my mother, and I walked in one night, and she said, "What's wrong?" And I broke down. I was very upset. And at that point in my life, I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. And I said, this is my life. I'm going to be installing shelving the rest of my life. And there's nothing wrong with vocational work. I just wasn't very good at it and didn't enjoy it. And she said, well, is there anything we can do? And she found out there was an appeal process. And so I wrote my appeal, and the truth has a nice ring to it. I'm like, I'm just getting my act together. I think I have a great future. I want to be a pediatrician. And if you don't let me in, I'm probably going to be installing shelving for the next several years. And I remember the day I got the call, and I was watching an after-school special, and this guy said, "Hi, it's so-and-so from the USide Admissions Department." He said, "We got your appeal letter." And he said, "Look, you're not qualified, but you're a native son of California, and we're going to give you a shot." And by the way, I still didn't get my act together for several years. But UCLA gave me the chance to get a job at Morgan Stanley, which got me into business school, and then I got my act together. You know, a lot of, especially young men, don't really mature until they're in their 20s or get kind of locked in or get their act together. I don't know when you sort of started hitting your stride, but for me, it really didn't happen until I was about 25. And I think that trying to give as many unremarkable kids a shot of being remarkable is the whole shooting match. Which isn't to say that we shouldn't continue to attract the best and brightest, and especially from around the world, which I think makes no sense that we're now waving them off. But I think it's inherent upon all of us who have nice lives to reverse engineer the things that aren't our fault. The University of California is not my fault. Someone else paid for that. Someone else had a vision for that. And it changed my life, specifically access and affordability.
Stick around. We'll be back in a minute. If you're trying to keep up with new academic books, you already know the problem. There's more coming out than anyone can possibly read. That's why New Books Network is the best resource for scholars and deep readers to keep up with new research and writing in their field. New Books Network is a massive collection of long-form interviews with scholars and authors, almost 30,000 conversations on the site across history, politics, literature, science, you name it. You'll hear directly from the authors who lay out their arguments and research methods. New Books Network also works closely with academic publishers, including partnerships with Princeton University Press, Oxford University Press, and MIT Press. So it's a great way to stay current with the kinds of books that shape actual conversations in higher ed. If you want a smart, efficient way to discover books worth taking seriously, go to newbooksnetwork.com. That's newbooksnetwork.com. You mentioned you're paying $7 million in taxes this year. You were installing shelving before you went to college. What's been, if I can be so blunt, the biggest change in your life about having money? You're a picture of social mobility. You've gone from having very little money to having a lot of it. What has that experience been like?
It's been awesome.
Unequivocally.
I've been poor. I've been wealthy. Wealthy is much better. And the best part was building wealth and economic security with a partner. When I met my wife, neither of us had any money. And so building that together and both sacrificing around time with our kids and the stress and anxiety and supporting one another and being great partners and achieving that economic security and being able to enjoy it with our kids and take care of our parents and give away some money to things we're passionate about, it's hugely rewarding. Hugely rewarding.
Are you one of these people who wants your children to struggle?
You know, Jack, do you have kids?
I have one, yeah, who is going into 9th grade next year, and I'm already sad about it.
You start with this notion that I went through all public schools, and you're like, okay, my kid's going to public school. All right, that ends when you find out there's this great little private school near your home. Okay, throw that out the window. My kid needs to have chores and needs to have jobs. All right, sort of do that. But here's the hard part, and I haven't got this figured out. I always say, if I had what my kids have, I wouldn't have what I have. The reason I'm successful beyond the University of California, rational passion for my well-being of my mother, I figured out early I had some, I'm going to call it economic trauma when I was a kid, that said, okay, if I'm going to be economically secure, I got to control what I can control, and I know I can work really hard, and I'm going to. My kids don't. They might have that fire, but they don't need to have it. If I had what my kids have, the only thing I know I'd have in my life when I was their age is a cocaine habit and a Range Rover. I got motivated because I wanted to take care of my mom because we were underinsured and she got very sick. That was very motivating for me. So you try to do your best. You get involved in competitive sports. You try and make them understand the value of money. Even if their parents are flying business class, you make them fly coach, although you can't do that under the age of 13. You give them chores. Try and make sure they have summer jobs. But I don't know if I have the answer because if I'd been born in the household that my kids have been born into, I just don't know if I'd have worked as hard. So I don't have the answer there.
I think one of the big worries that we hear about, and you can go back and look at the Chronicle over 60 years, and people have been talking about grit. These students lack grit, and, you could attach it to any generation. There's nothing remarkable about Gen Z in this regard. But what do you think about that as a concept, that's something higher ed needs to figure out a way to instill in young people?
I think by the time they get to us, I'll give you an example under charging. I think classes on leadership, sustainability, ethics, and leadership are all I think they're classes with no measurable outcome. We hire FIPS, formerly important people, to come tell their war stories about how awesome they are. Let me summarize every leadership class. It was really hard and I did the right thing. Okay, end of class. Save yourself $7,000. And this constant notion that we're going to teach a kid, the kids I teach are 27, 28, I'm going to teach them to be more ethical. I think as parents and as faculty, we like to think that we're engineers of the sheep, that we get to make the sheep. No, we don't. We're shepherds. We get to maybe point them in a certain direction. We get to decide what they eat, but that's about it. I think grit comes earlier. One of the big benefits I did get at UCLA was I joined crew my sophomore year. And anyone who's rowed, no, rowing is not about technique. It's not even about strength. It's about who is willing to endure more pain. Full stop. Full stop. And the ability, when people think they can't take anymore, whether it's they have their heart broken or they get fired or they're running a marathon, when you row crew, what you realize is that when you think you're at your limit, you're about a third of the way to your actual limit. And so that, for me, instilled a great deal of grit. It paid off my whole life, quite frankly. I just realized that, like, most people have absolutely no idea of their physical, mental, or emotional limits. They've never really tested them. How do you instill that in a kid? I try with sports, but the good news is I have 2 kids. We just haven't treated them that much differently. I bought one of my kids this really nice cashmere hoodie, 250 pounds. He went and returned it because he said, I like it, but it's just too expensive, and charged it back to my card. My other kid, he would take my credit card if I could and be doing lines of ketamine at the club. I mean, they're just so entirely different. And we haven't treated them much differently. So I like what First Lady Obama said, you do your best, but they kind of come to you. And Jack, the only benefit, I don't know if you're thinking about a second, what you realize when you have 2 kids, oh my gosh, it is nature over nurture. They're just, the only thing you know about a second kid is it's going to be entirely different than the first. And I don't care, you do not treat them that differently. So the way I somewhat comfort myself with the fact that my kids are just not getting the same motivations I had, the same installation or distillation or inculcation of grit, is that a lot of it is in the batter. Now, some of it I definitely believe is nurture, but I do think most of it is kind of they come to you.
Can I make a really weird segue into your work on White Lotus?
Oh, 100%. Let's be honest. I saved the season, Jack. I saved the season.
You did. I was totally not locked in to season 3 of White Lotus, and then this disembodied voice came through the phone speaking to Jason Isaacs' character and said, the FBI is about to raid your home.
That's right.
And
That's right.
It really did save the season. I think that I am contorting myself to ask you about this because I'm interested and I like the show, but I do think there's something here. For folks who don't know, you did have a voice cameo on the last season of White Lotus that was set in Thailand. And there was a character played by Jason Isaacs who was very frequently portrayed wearing a Duke shirt, which ticked off Duke to no end because of the tawdry subject matter, etc. But it did make me wonder if Duke was upset about some other aspects of this. Duke doesn't look good by these measures we've been talking about historically, whether it's percent Pell or the percent of students that they admit who come from wealthy families. This is something that they've kind of had a public shaming over. And here was a story about uber privileged, ultra wealthy people up to no good, constantly wearing Duke stuff. Do you think they were hitting on something that was particularly sensitive to that institution?
Well, I think all of them are coming to grips, and society's coming to grips with the fact that tax-free status is supposed to be bestowed upon organizations that are serving the public good. And at some point, when you have a 4% admissions rate and your university's in the middle of nowhere, and you have an endowment where you could let in double the number of kids and not sacrifice any quality of those freshmen, are you still a public servant? Duke's a really interesting case because Duke this year I think will have a lower admissions rate than Harvard. And I think Duke's going to produce more presidents in the future than Harvard, who's traditionally produced a lot of presidents, because presidents come from two things. It's a combination of really impressive people and how rich their families are. And Duke is the chocolate and peanut butter of that now. It's attracting really wealthy families and really impressive kids. And I have a personal story about Duke. You'll see, you have a few years, but you'll see, you take your kid on a college tour. And we did, I think, 7 or 9 schools in 7 or 9 days. I can't remember. Ton of fun. And one of the schools we went to was Duke. And you do this tour, and it's amazing. And some high EQ kid who's ethnically ambiguous and is in a sorority, but at the same time is very politically correct. I mean, they picked those wildly impressive, attractive young men and young women to. And then
and by the way, none of you are getting in here. But
okay, that's where I'm headed with this. and of course, none of the kids ask any questions. It's all white women of wine asking questions about the safety of the campus. It should be illegal for a parent to ever ask a question on a school tour. Anyways, someone asks, what is the admissions rate? And the guy goes, well, we look at it holistically, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, 4%. And we're touring around the campus, and I said to my son, I said, let's go grab a burger. And he said, what? And I'm like, yeah, let's leave. And he goes, are we allowed to do that? And I said, yeah. And he said, why? And granted, I purposely like to shock my son because he's so woke. But I said to him, let's break up with this bitch before she breaks up with us. You're not getting in here. And he looked at me and he said, okay. And we went and grabbed a burger.
Now, but this is the question, though. You're now the rich parent, Scott.
My kid wouldn't get into Duke.
Aren't you going to be part of that 4%?
No, he wouldn't have gotten into Duke. I mean, we didn't apply, but he wouldn't have gotten in, I don't think. My kid is really strong, much stronger than me. Great kid. He's not a freak. He's not getting perfect scores on the SAT. He's just getting great scores.
And I don't want to get into something that's personal about your son, so just stop me. But I'm just curious. Do you feel you are treated differently as a family by admissions offices because you're Scott Galloway?
Yeah.
What gives you that sense?
The development department of certain universities call me and say, have you considered our university? I've given a lot of money to universities, so I'm on some list somewhere. Universities are businesses. They're much more sensitive to it now. It depends on the university. If you called me and said, I got to get my kid into USC, I'd be like, all right, do you have $500,000? $1 million? We'll figure it out. You might have to go through a side door by going to some other school for a couple of years. But keep in mind, the Varsity Blues scandal, these people didn't go to jail for bribing university officials. They did it for trying to bribe them on the cheap. If Aunt Becky had showed up with $1 million and went to the development department and said, I'm going to give you $1 million 2 years before my kids apply, they would have worked with her to figure out a way to get her daughters into USC. But because she went through a side door and tried to cheap out at $250,000 or whatever it was, $80,000 to a consultant, she went to jail. So it's very situational. But a fairly prestigious private school with aggressive fundraising targets, oh, sure, they love the idea. This is the coded language they use. We don't admit kids, we admit families. And by the way, that goes all the way back through the ecosystem. If you apply to a private school when your kid's in the 3rd grade, there'll be questions like, do you consider yourself philanthropic? Or put another way, are you going to give us money?
Do you think the people caught up in the Varsity Blues scandal did anything wrong? I mean, you said they were dumb to not give more money, but...
Yeah, I think that at a certain point, I think if you are giving money to someone and taking photographs to fraudulently convey your kid plays sports when they don't, I think that's wrong.
Paying off test proctors, etc.
Well, yeah.
There was some dirty deeds.
No doubt. Should they have gone to prison? What I do see, though, is that I stand by this. If someone called me and said, I got $500,000 or $1 million I can give to, it's not going to work at the University of California. It's not going to work. By the way, it works at Harvard. You just need $10 million. You give Harvard $10 million, I don't know what the number is now, your mediocre to good kid will get in. And by the way, maybe that's not the wrong thing, because I have no problem with kids getting seats if they show up with millions of dollars, as long as those millions of dollars are used to expand the number of freshman seats that then go to kids who don't have the money to buy their way in.
But when we write about admission scandals, whether it's Varsity Blues or other things we've covered over the years, I mean, I know there was the clout scandal at Illinois well before Varsity Blues. There is just an insane appetite in the public for that story. And, Varsity Blues involves celebrities and big-name institutions, but what do you think that's about? Why do you think this is just catnip for us?
Well, it goes much deeper. I think the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, what happened with Varsity Blues are all righteous movements in terms of the disdain and the government moving in. They're also forms of revolution against the rich. Varsity Blues was going after rich people. The Me Too movement went after rich executives. People are fed up with a superclass of millionaires and billionaires, as evidenced by the Epstein scandal, who believe they're not subject to any decorum, any ethics, and that the top 1% in our nation are protected by the law but not bound by it, and the bottom 99% are bound by the law but not protected by it. So when you hear about a bunch of actors trying to use a side door to fraudulently or misleadingly cheat and get their kids into elite universities, it's an opportunity for an attorney general to run for governor. I mean, that's just going to be catnip, right?
But I don't know how this changes for colleges and universities because, part of what we've learned from the Trump administration's pressure campaign against Harvard and these other institutions is that they've all left themselves incredibly vulnerable because they so desperately need money. I mean, that's part of how you end up on Epstein's Island, too, like desperately need money. And colleges feel like they desperately need money to do the work that they're trying to do. Can we ever get past that they're going to constantly be in these unsavory positions because of their endless appetite for money? And we're talking, again, about a very small slice of higher education. I'm not talking about every community college in the country here.
The community college system and the junior college system in California is just a gift. You show up, you pay a little bit of money, and it's a feeder for UC. Like, do okay here for 2 years, show you're ready for college. Maybe you weren't coming out of high school at 18. And the University of California has much higher admissions rates for kids who go to junior college. It's a great way to kind of cut the cost of college by 40 or 50% by going to junior college for 2 years. So there are some people in higher ed doing God's work. In terms of the voracious, never-ending appetite for money, I think some of that comes down to a level of inefficiency that no other industry would tolerate. I think I work with the finest faculty in America. I think a third of them should be put on an ice floe. I think they absolutely don't pull their weight. And not only do they not pull their weight, they have become so irrelevant in their domain that they find the only relevance they can achieve is by being very obstructive on the faculty.
You sound great at parties, Scott.
Oh, you can imagine how popular I am among my colleagues. Tenure was the right idea. It's been totally bastardized. You don't need tenure at a business school. What you said about Gap 1 accounting in 1989 is not going to get you fired. You just don't need lifetime. And we give people tenure about the time they become unproductive. And we have recognized how incredibly inefficient and expensive the system is. And when someone is granted tenure, the university has to put $3 million aside because they know that person's about to become unproductive. So do you need tenure at a law school or in the humanities? Yeah, I can understand it. Do you need it at a business school? I don't think so. Do you need it at dental school? Anyways, we have become so inefficient, so expensive that we've created this monster that needs more and more capital. We've had the Rolexification of these universities. When I went to UCLA, it was there was no bougainvillea. There was no amazing gym with Pilates. But you know what? It didn't matter because as long as there was beer and decent economics classes and a football game out in Pasadena, I was going to have an amazing time.
Every college president in the country will tell you the parents and students are demanding that.
No, the parents. I would say it's the parents. And I think the competition around the Rolexification and also the ego of alumni that want to have their name on a gym or a Center for Public Relations, I think it has gone out of control. And I think a lot of it is the donors. So I give money, but I demand it's for the least sexy program. I just gave money to the University of I'm doing a lot of virtue signaling here. University of Wisconsin-Madison, and it's for this program where they go into local penitentiaries.
A pretty selective institution. You're okay with that?
If you're in state in Wisconsin, I think the admissions rate is 20 or 30%. No?
Okay.
I think they're doing God's work. I think they're trying to let in as many good kids from the Midwest as possible. And you walk on that campus, it's packed. It's nice. It's not beautiful. God, walk around Duke. It's the Four Seasons, Raleigh-Durham. I mean, it's insane. So I think this Rolexification and artificial scarcity has resulted in a transfer of wealth from good middle-class households who dream of sending their kids into college and are told their whole life that education is the way out, as it was in the 20th century, it was for my family, and oftentimes end up with a bill they can't afford, and they have just the wrong amount of money. They have enough money such that they don't get a lot of financial aid, but they don't have enough money such that, college now for an upper middle income home that doesn't qualify for financial aid, at one of the universities we mentioned, you're talking about probably close to $400,000, right?
UW-Madison, this is me Googling, Scott.
Yep.
His admissions rate is like 45%. I thought it was
45, right on.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay.
And when you think about Common App, their apps have probably tripled. So the UW-Madison, that's an example. They're doing God's work. They're saying if you're a good kid and you do reasonably well in high school, we're going to give you a great education. And by the way, that admissions rate is 10 times, they're 10 times less selective than Duke. Guess what? Google still recruits at UW-Madison. Hedge funds
it makes
still
sense.
recruit
My
them.
editor, Dan Barrett, went there, and I've never thought highly of him. But
there you go. But that's an example. I think some of our state schools, UW-Madison, is doing amazing work. But where I was headed was when I give money, I do it for unpopular programs that expand access and expand the freshman class size. And unfortunately, kind of the ego-driven nature of some of the donors, the fact that I don't think faculty are held to the same standards of efficiency that other industries are held to because of what is essentially an inefficient guild called tenure, and also our ability to build the strongest brands. The strongest brand in the world is not Apple. It's not Ferrari. It's MIT. It's Stanford. It's Harvard. These are the strongest brands in the world. What other brand commands $500,000 over 4 years at 95 points of gross margin? There is no brand that's ever been able to do that. And the way they do that is through an LVMH strategy of artificially sequestering supply. That's fine. That's their right. They're a private university. They should not be tax exempt.
And to some extent, these institutions and higher ed generally don't totally control their brand. They don't control the narrative. There's brands and narratives are imposed upon them. Part of the brand identity that is wrapped around higher education is perpetuated not by the institutions themselves, but by pop culture. So whether it's the White Lotus portrayal of Duke, or I was even thinking of the 70s and 80s portrayals of higher ed, whether it was, Animal House, or even some, I guess, skepticism of higher ed in the 90s with movies like Good Will Hunting, that sort of thing. Skepticism of elites. What do you think is going to be like the next sort of pop culture story around higher education? If you were writing the movie of higher ed right now, what would it be?
Super thoughtful question. I don't know if I know the answer to it. I think the story you're going to hear more about is that, how there's all these incubators like Idea Labs or Y Combinator? I think universities are becoming that. And I think universities attract such incredible human capital. I think you're going to have more and more people decide to. A friend of mine's daughter is dropping out after 3 years at Harvard, going into her senior year doing really well, to join some other classmates who've started some AI startup. I think you're going to see that everywhere because the funders are trolling around these campuses. You have incredible human capital. You have kids who can get their parents to put in the first $100,000, $200,000, $500,000. They have access to really intelligent faculty. They have access to amazing co-founders. They have access to confidence. 20 of their friends have access to companies they want to sell their SaaS platform or their AI startup into. So I think you're going to see actually more and more kids pull a Zuckerberg or a Gates or whatever and drop out to start companies. I think we're going to see more and more of that. But what is the social zeitgeist or the stories coming out of universities? I don't know. What I will tell you, though, is that the whole narrative of college is dead and not important has never been less. I think it's ridiculous. I don't think college has ever been, at least starting, I don't think it's ever been more important.
So you are, despite all of your skepticism, pretty bullish on college.
Oh, yeah. In a world of AI, okay, AI can do your work, but we're going to need more people who thoughtfully understand how to manage it, invest in it, put a thin layer of innovation on top of it to create amazing startups. And just look at the data. I mean, you know this better than me, but my sense is apps are actually up this year. Wasn't this supposed to be the year that college folded? Wasn't this supposed to be the year that higher education got disrupted by AI? Aren't college apps up? I mean, some of the trends are pretty obvious. Public schools, better value, schools in the South. Parents don't want to send their kids to a protest with Palestinian flags everywhere. Regardless of the political values, they're like, no, just go to college football games and get drunk. I literally think that's what kids and parents are saying right now. We don't want our kid to be radicalized to the far right or the far left. We just want them to go have a college experience. So my sense is the Southern schools are absolutely booming, and they're also seen as being a little less, more politically diverse, if you will.
Well, there's certainly been reporting about that in the SEC schools.
Yeah,
Sure.
And schools I didn't hear on people's list before, Clemson, University of Georgia. I'm hearing about more often about these schools in the South that have what I'll call that kind of rah-rah factor. But at the same time, I heard Harvard's still going to get 55,000 apps. So, yeah, it's still, you know what? It's still a really good business, and I think we managed to raise our tuition again 4% faster than inflation. So despite, quote-unquote, the unbundling and disruption of this industry, it continues to be one of the most resilient, price-insensitive industries in the world.
All right, Scott, we'll leave it there. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for your good work.
College Matters from the Chronicle is a production of the Chronicle of Higher Education, the nation's leading independent newsroom covering colleges. If you like the show, please leave us a review or invite a friend to listen. And remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. You can find an archive of every episode, all of our show notes, and much more at chronicle.com/College Matters. If you like, drop us a note at collegematters@chronicle.com. We are produced by Rococo Punch. Our Chronicle producer is Fernanda Zamudio Suarez. Our podcast artwork is by Cottrell Thomas. Special thanks to our colleagues Brock Reed, Sarah Brown, Carmen Mendoza, Ron Coddington, Joshua Hatch, and all of the people at the Chronicle who make this show possible. I'm Jack Stripling. Thanks for listening.